Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshops, where we get together in the middle of the week and for some of us in the middle of the day or middle of the morning, and we talk technology. This is the third Wednesday of the month, so that means, got to point the right way, Linux guys. So today we're going to be focusing on Linux, but today is going to be a special beginning of probably a three-part workshop with the Windows users point of view of getting started with Linux. So to be that way, I am using a Windows computer to do my demo, so that I'm actually a Windows user today, and we'll see everything like that. Our presentation team today is Cal Esnault and myself. We're going to do the most of this. The team for our Zoom is Bill James, who is going to help you with any kind of technical problems you might have. And then if you're new to here, then Judy Tallur is here, and she is our question person. We request that all questions that you have for the presenters are sent to her through the chat box. Drop the little arrow and select Judy Tallur and send those questions to her, not to either the two of us, because we're looking at our screens to present. We can't really see the chat box, or gets in our way. So other than that, there's not a lot of introduction that needs to be made, because you've seen Cal and myself and the other team members many times. So we're just going to go ahead and get started today. And with the beauty of multiple desktops, I can have things open and running. Today we're going to be talking about Linux, starting Linux as a Windows user, and how to make it very easy. And to begin with, my plan is to talk to you about how you can easily slide over to Linux with very little learning curve. And that's the key to this transition, is going to be through the applications that you're using on your Windows. And these are programs that are available to Windows users, and they're common to Windows and Linux. And these are all of the programs that I would be using on either Windows or on Linux. And so that makes the move so much easy, because the programs that you use in Windows work the same as the ones you do in Linux. And I'm just going to use the categories and talk about what makes it so easy. And always we start out with the big thing we do on the computer is internet. And if you're using any of these particular browsers on your Windows machine, Firefox or Brave, Chromium, Chrome, these are the same ones that run on Linux and work the same way. Firefox is usually the default browser that's found on almost every Linux distribution. There's one that's Linux Lite, has just switched to Chromium Chrome as their default, but most everybody uses Firefox. So if you've used Firefox on your Windows computer, then when you go to Linux, it's going to work exactly the same way. You won't even know the difference. Also, if you use extensions on your browsers, well, those extensions carry over, because this is browser based, it's not operating system based. So that works Real easy. Also, if you do a internet searching, and we've had to really work hard to make sure people understand that the browser is one tool to see the internet, and the search engine is what you use to search the internet. They're not two of the same things. If you use any of these search engines, DuckDuckGo, the Google, or the Bing on your Windows machine, you're going to go to the internet and go to DuckDuckGo, Google, or Bing, whichever is your preferred one, and do the searches, and it's going to work the same way. And again, once you're using your browser and your search engine, you won't even realize that you're using Linux and not using Windows. I'm a big pusher, and so is Judy, for password security. And so we all say that you need a password manager, and programs like Bitwarden and LastPass and RoboForm, they work the same on Windows and Linux. So, you know, if you're using that, that you're not going to have any kind of a, you know, problem making that switch. Bitwarden and LastPass are, you know, web-based, so it's really your browser that you're using. Bitwarden does have a client that you can install, but again, whether it's the Windows installed program or the Linux installed program, you know, they work the same. You're not going to notice anything different. Same as we always talk about backing up. We always say that you need to have a third backup, which is off-site. And so we talk about the different cloud-based programs. Dropbox is one of the oldest one. Most everybody knows about Google Drive and Microsoft's OneDrive. And the other one that I think is a very excellent one I use is pCloud. If you use it on Windows, and then you go to Linux, it's all going to work the same because you're doing uploading to the cloud. So it really isn't your operating system issue. Now, I will say that Judy's favorite iDrive isn't one that I can put on this list because it doesn't have the same kind of client for Linux as it does for Windows. So I have to leave that one off, because if you're an iDrive person, when you go to Linux, you have to go to the cloud-based storage instead of using the client that's on the computer. Also, with communication, if you're a client-based mail program like the old Outlook Express when we used to use it, Thunderbird is the one we do now. If you use Thunderbird on Windows and you go to Linux, it's the same program. If you go and use your web-based mail, absolutely no difference because it's web-based, it's your browser. So, you know, it's not going to work any different if you're using Gmail, Outlook Mail, or my Proton Mail. And the same, I use Zoom on Windows today, and I use Zoom on Linux another day. Works the same as Jitsi and Skype. So all of these communication, these programs are all what we call cross-platform. And so if it works well and you know how to use it on Windows, then you know how to use it on Linux. Same goes for your productivity tool. LibreOffice is by far the default program for Linux for your Office suite. If you use LibreOffice or OpenOffice on Windows, when you go to Linux, it's going to work pretty much the same. Now, I will say that the only difference that I've noticed is the icons. The design of some of the icons for LibreOffice on the different distros. You got an artist who says, I like the save icon for the little floppy disk. I draw it like this way. But basically it's all the same, so it works the same. And of course, if you use Google Docs or Office Online, there's not going to be any difference either, because again, web-based. So again, if you're using all of these, I did throw in one for audio and video, and that's the VLC program, which is by far the top program for any platform that does audio and video and a lot more. So if you've been using it on Windows and you switch to Linux, it's not going to be any different. So here, the results of all this is if you're using those programs now on Windows, you're going to be very comfortable when you switch over to Linux because it's the same programs, the same files. You can access all the files and they'll open and close and save just like you've used. And so for me and for other people, the slide over to Linux from Windows was a very pleasing, positive switch because they were very familiar with the software that they use, and it just made it over. Now, granted, there are some things under the hood that might be different, but I know that many of my Windows people don't do anything under the hood of Windows. They just use the programs on top of the operating system. And so making the switch is going to be no problem at all. Okay, that ends my first part. Judy will have a slide, the presentation PDF that will continue what I'm going to do live. And we always cross our fingers when we do live stuff, but I'm going to do it live, and you will have on the PDF everything that I'm doing, screenshots, so that you could follow along if you didn't want to come back and watch the video. All right, so we're going to switch back over, and we're going to be talking about test driving Linux, because we do that with cars. I don't know very many people that buy a car without test driving it, because you've got to find out if you can fit in a car without hitting your head. And you got to find out that you feel comfortable when the door closes, that you're not squished. So we want you to try Linux, but we understand that trying Linux is kind of a concern, because you don't want to make changes to your Windows computer. You don't want to have to deal with a lot of stuff. So today we're going to take that into here's the easiest way that you can do this, and it's not going to cause you any problems. And what we're going to do today, I'm going to start by showing you how to create a bootable thumb drive so that you can test drive Linux. And then Cal's going to take over after that and teach you about how you boot to a computer and take you through a run of our Linux operating system. And so we use this bootable because it'll run off a thumb drive. You don't make any changes to your computer at all. The only change that you will be making is that you will access your boot manager, as he tells you, to boot to the thing. Once you are running this live one, as Cal will show you, it's as though you're running the operating system and you have access to everything else. So the first step is that we need to get a Linux operating system, or what we call a distro, or the ISO file that we can use. We've been talking a lot about Linux Mint, which is a very easy, very solid version of Linux, and is very easy for Windows people to switch and use with very little trouble. The web address, we have two different ways that we can get distros, and we've talked about that before on our workshops. And one of them is going to directly to the website for the distro, or we tell you to go to Distro Watch so that you can be very sure that you're going to the right place. I've got it listed in the handout so that you know that the place we want to go to is linuxmint.com. And when you get there, and this would be the same place that if you went to Distro Watch to Linux Mint, clicked on the download link, it would bring you to this website. So linuxmint.com. Right now we are using version 21. It's the one that just came out this summer. So it's the new one. And when you get here, you could read about it, or we can click on the download, and then it's going to switch us to a different kind of a page. Because with Linux Mint, there are 3 different versions. And I'm going to make this a little bit larger. And I have to remember to go back. 3 different versions because we all like a little bit, different. That's the beauty of Linux, is that you have options. Linux Mint comes with 3 different desktop environments, as we've called it before. And all that means it's the tools that make up what you see and use. In Mint, pretty much they're all the same, but there's a few things that they're based on that makes it a little bit different. For example, the first version of Mint is called Cinnamon. They say this is the sleek, modern, innovative. And this is the brainchild of Linux Mint. They developed Cinnamon from the scratch, and now there are other distros that are taking the open source and using that to make a Cinnamon version for the other ones. Like Ubuntu now has a Cinnamon version. They say it's slick, beautiful, full of features. You can see in the bottom corner, it has a very traditional menu. When you click on it, you can see shortcuts on the side. You can add more to make it taller. And then you have categories, and then you have what actual programs are in those categories. Some people, like me, like the Mate edition. And this is very similar. It's based on, or it's actual Linux Mint again, but a different desktop that has what they consider more of a classic desktop environment. It says that it develops a little bit slower in the updating of the desktop. Now, remember, the distro updates every 2 years, just like Ubuntu does. But within that, the people who create desktop environments, they issue new ones periodically. And so Mint is saying that the Cinnamon one gets updated more often than the Mate, and that's because Mate wants to be more stable. And you can see on the bottom corner, the menu is basically the same, except we don't have the shortcuts that you can add to on the side. And these are broken down into shortcuts to places, like on your computer, your system tools, and then there's your applications. However, what Mate's menu has is there's a button in the top right-hand corner that says shortcuts. So you can click on that and just have your shortcuts similar to what Windows 11 has on their screen with your shortcuts, and then you can go back to all your programs. Lastly, there is another edition of Mint called XFCE, which uses the XFCE desktop. And this is a very lightweight one. It's very stable. It may not have as many features, and most of us, we call those bells and whistles, that Cinnamon and Mate have, but I've used XFCE. A number of distributions use it as their default because it's good and you can customize it. It's just not really fancy. And as you can see in the menu on the side, it just has categories and the programs. There's not even any place for shortcuts right there. So with any distribution, if there are multiple choices, your decision is going to be which one fits best. And that's why we want to teach you this, to be able to create bootable ones, to try them out and see what you like. For our demonstration, we are going to go back and we are going to use the Cinnamon edition, since we're talking Windows people. And I need to move on. So when we decide that we're going to use Cinnamon instead of Mate or that, if you go to Ubuntu, there'll be like 6 or 7 choices because they have that many. Mint used to have a fourth choice, but they decided to keep it just at 3. So we've chosen cinnamon mint, and we're going to download. Now, the difference here is that we have lots of download places. With Windows, you just go to Microsoft and you download. But with Mint or Linux, we have locations around the world where we store the ISO file, and you can get it. So if we look at the cinnamon, and I scroll down here to the download mirrors, you'll find, oh, I do have to make sure that this is a 64-bit. If you got a 32-bit machine, you're going to have to probably go to XFCE or something else, but we don't have very many 32-bit machines around the world because it hasn't been produced in about a dozen or more years. But as you can see here, you can have a world location, or for our Canadian friends that are visiting with us today, you know, there are 2 good spots at Manitoba and the University of Waterloo. And if you look through the USA, there are a number of them. And then if you are from another foreign country, you've got your own places. And the only reason for that is that it makes it easier that you're not going clear across town to get something when you can get it from a local store. You have to decide what's best for you. For me, being in Ohio, the 2 that I usually use would be the James Madison University, which is to my east over in Virginia, or I go to the west and get it from the Purdue Linux Users Group. But for the rest of you, you've got to decide. You might find something close to your location. So I'm going to pick the Purdue one. And I will say that you are at the mercy of the internet when it comes to the downloading of your ISO. Your download speed to your house is a factor. The use of or how many people are using the servers. So we're going to see. I'm not going to worry about downloading. It's going to take forever. I already have it downloaded. But I know that last night late when I did it, I was able to download in like 2 minutes. But I know that we had, I was working with somebody else trying to download the Mint, and it was going to take like 45 minutes or so. So I'm going to click on the Purdue, and I'm going to look up there and say, oh, I've got a good connection to Purdue. And so you can see it in terms of Firefox up in the corner. They do the, show you the download, and they did a fancy thing. It doesn't make it work any better, but they got a little clock that's going around to let you visually see how it goes. So for me, today was a good day to go to the Purdue Linux Users Group and get the cinnamon, because it's less than two minutes. So I'll let that run. Now, of course, when you download something, most of us leave the default location that I teach in my classes, that if you download something from the internet, it's going to go to your downloads folder. Sometimes people always ask me, well, where is it going? And I try to get them. If you are downloading, it goes to your download folder. Now, once it gets downloaded, you have the option, you can leave that ISO right there, or I have a folder on my computers that I store a lot of different ISOs on there. And so you can see it's done, and I can click on the folder and go to it, and that'll pick it up, and there we are. I have a Linux Mint Cinnamon that's in my downloads folder. Now, on this computer, let me go back to see if Windows is going to show me users, and I'm on VTC. And of course, on the VTC, I do not have the folder for ISOs. I have it on another one, but we're just, oh, nope, there it is, ISO. So I have a folder that I keep ISOs to be able to get to it, but you don't have to move it. You can just leave it right there. So we're going to leave it right there for a second. All right, so now we have ISOs downloaded. And if you're in the mood to be trying out different ones, you can download a whole bunch on your computer. They only take up a couple of gigs, and then you can test them and try them out. We now need to have another one of a tool that now that we have a ISO, we need a tool that's going to create this bootable thumb drive that we can use. There are a number of programs that you can have because in Linux, we have choices. The one I'm going to use today is called Etcher. Balena company makes a program called Etcher that flashes OS images to an SD card or USB, and then you can be able to boot to it. It's not like copying the ISO because an ISO by itself doesn't really run. It has to be made bootable. The website address is in my notes. It's balena.io is the company and Etcher is their program. There will be probably somebody who later today in our open time will tell you that they like a different program better. And that's perfectly fine. Everybody likes what's their favorite. I like Etcher because of the ease of what it works. All of the programs that I'm going to show you are all open source programs. And you know how we Linux people like open source because we want to know what this program is going to do on the inside. So Balena Etcher is an open source. The other one that people will mention is called Rufus, another open source. So it gets a plus from me being open source. To me, though, that Rufus is a little bit more confusing to use because as you can see on here, there's all of these different fields that we have to fill in and pick and choose. Whereas back on Balena, there are 3 different buttons that we pick, and I'll show you how that goes. Whoop. There we go. But Rufus is a very good one, and I'm sure that we'll have somebody who says to them, it's the best. That's fine. You use whatever you want. The reason I'm not going to be using it is because Rufus is not what I cause for my A++. This is not a cross-platform program. Rufus will only work on Windows. And I'm a cross-platform person. So Etcher will work on Windows and Linux and Mac. And so Rufus is fine. A lot of people like it. It just is second on my list. Now, one other program that is very good and a lot of people like it is a program called UNetbooten. It is cross-platform open source, so it ranks high, but this one does have a unique feature. If you look at the screen or the screenshot down here, you pick the distribution you want to use and it will download it for you and then create the thumb drive. It'll do what we are doing in 2 steps in one big process. And so a lot of people like UNetbooten for that reason. And because they're all free, try each of them and see which one you like the best. All right, so I'm going to go back to Etcher and we're going to use it. And as I said, it's cross-platform, but it knows what operating system I have. But if I click the down caret, you'll see that I can download an Etcher for Mac, for Windows, for 32-bit and 64-bit. It works for both. And for Linux, I can get an app image. We'll talk about that, later. We've mentioned it before, but it's just a different way of packaging, but it's still, there's a version for all 3. So I'm going to do the Windows version. And so I'm going to download it. And again, you'll see it's not a big program, so it downloads very fast. And we're done. Okay, I'm going to minimize that because we don't need the browser again. Now, I'm going to go into the downloads folder because we've downloaded Etcher, but Etcher needs to be run. The ISO we don't run, we use it. So I'm going to double click because it's an exe file. And I'm going to agree to it. And now I'm going to have Etcher. If you've already done this, when you come back to it, you just go into your start menu and go to your E's. Nope, you go to your B's. It's Belina Etcher is the full name. And so then you would start it up from there. All right, so here's why I like Etcher, because it's going to be so easy for this process. First off, do you want to get it from a file? Do you want to flash it from a URL? So you can go up and get it. I'm more comfortable with making sure I've got it here, not pulling it down. That's why I kind of like Etcher a little bit better than NetBootin, but some people like to be able to combine and do the download and all. And you can also clone a drive, which means you're going to make it identical to a drive. But we're going to flash it from a file. And so now you have to go to where it's stored, either in the downloads like we have right now, or if you had an ISO folder that you kept all years, you would switch it. So I'm just going to select Cinnamon. Open it. So now I've got it set. We're going to use Cinnamon. It wants to know where. I'm going to put in a 16 gig thumb drive. There it is, the empty one. Now it says, okay, find the target. Where do we want to send it? And when I click on that, Etcher looks at my computer and my hard drives. It sees that I have two installed. I've got an M.2 and I've got an SSD, but they know I don't want to go and flash it there. But there they are. So I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to pick the USB flash drive. And this way, make sure. One thing nice about Etcher is that so far nothing happened and we can change. We can change. So I've picked that I'm going to use the ISO that is a Linux Mint 21 Cinnamon. I'm going to put it to my flash drive. And if I had a SD card, it would do it to that. And now it says, last step, flash it, which means burn it to the thumb drive and make it a bootable one. So I'm just going to hit that. It requires admin approval. And then you just sit back. So it's going to start. And because that was Windows that was reading that thumb drive again. And so we are flashing. And it doesn't take that long to do it. And then the other thing that Etcher does is it validates to make sure that your program is burned correctly, and you will get a message that says it is all done. When it is done and done the validation, then you can have the option of either closing out Etcher or doing another one. So you can keep using this program if need be. And as they say, they have, Belina has a couple of other programs and they're just kind of advertising what they have. It's one that you might also want to test out. 30 seconds left to go. But as you can see, this was a very simple 3-step. Select the ISO you want, select the thumb drive that you want, and then hit the go button. And it does it. Now, I will tell you that don't try to go and look at this thumb drive because Windows won't read it very well because it's a Linux thumb drive now, because you're going to boot to a Linux operating system. And so if I tried to show that drive, Linux or Windows would come up and say there's something wrong with it. You need to format this, and it gets messed up because you have to do it a certain way, because there are partitions on here. There's an EFI partition so that it can work on a Windows machine to boot it to it, and there's a program part that's the operating system, and another part. So Windows doesn't really know how to deal with this. So ignore the Windows and just work it through Etcher. Just about done. Yeah, and Belina has a virtual machine that you can use, just like we have with, we've talked about VirtualBox and VMware. They've got a Belina Virt. All right, now, as you can see that Microsoft now says, well, you've got a damaged, real bad thumb drive, but that's because they can't read it. In fact, it will come up and say it's not accessible. But if we looked at it, it doesn't say, oh, messed up. And if I unplug it and plug it back in, it'll end up showing two different E and an F, because it's got two parts. So that's, a lot of people think that, oh, it didn't work right. Well, Etcher says it was successful. And I can either flash another one or I can close this out. Now, that's all I'm going to show you. That's the first step that you would do in testing out Linux, is to get the two programs, the ISO, and then get the Etcher. Or if you test it out and you find out you like Rufus better, or for just Windows users, or you net booting, that's fine. You do whatever you want to. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do with what I like. And then you're ready to go to the next half of our presentation today with booting it up to a computer and then taking it for a spin drive. I think what I'll do now is I will stop my sharing.
And I have questions.
I figured you would. And I'll turn me back on.
We'll have live questions at the end of both presentations.
Oh, you're going to hold them then?
Yeah. Well, somebody
okay.
raised their hand. Are you ready?
Yeah. And I said, and I thought when you said I have questions,
I do.
But they're going to be waiting. Okay. So that's the first part.
Are you ready for your questions?
I think that might be good to ask some of the questions that you have right now.
That's what I want to do. On.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Why should I change operating systems in midstream? What makes Linux better than Windows?
We have another whole workshop on that, so we're not going to take the time because we have done that before. We have done it a number of times. I will just simply say it's a better operating system. It's free and it's more secure. And it has thousands upon thousands of software, but that's not the focus of today because we've done that before. We want to show people how to get started.
Can John talk a little bit more about connecting to Google Drive and OneDrive? He doesn't find it straightforward due to no native clients.
That's Google's fault and OneDrive. You don't have to have a client. You can do it strictly with the web-based. That's why I do pCloud, because pCloud on Linux has a client that works really great. But the focus was that if you're using Google Drive, OneDrive for storage, it works the same way. And there are some really hard workarounds for OneDrive to get something to work. But you don't have to do that. You can strictly do all of your backing up through cloud, web-based. And then if you want a good one, you switch to pCloud or one of the other ones that do have clients.
And how much is pCloud?
Free.
It's free. There you go. Get
Up
that part
and
in too.
yeah, just like with OneDrive and Google Drive, you get a certain amount of storage for free, and then everybody requires you to pay a little bit more to get more.
I need to include that in my presentations. Can you flash more than one ISO to the same thumb drive? And if you try, will the first be erased?
Yes. You can't, this process today was for a single thumb drive. In November, we'll talk about another program called Ventoy, in which you can install multiple, and then when you boot up, you get to choose which one you want. But on this particular program, and Rufus and new net booting, it's a single one. And if I would put that drive in and do a different operating system, it would wipe out the first one and do it. And and both Cal and I, we have multiple drives. They're so cheap now, the 16s, that, you know, we like to do just build one, build another one, build another one. I've got 10 over here in my little case, 10 different ones.
And my question is, we have new people here. Why do Linux have fancy names? We're just used to Windows 10, Windows 11, whatever Windows next, but you have Cinnamon, and who decides what the name is going to be?
The developers of the particular distribution or the developers of the particular desktop. And that's the big difference. In Windows, you have one version and one desktop, and that's it. But in open source, we've talked about the fact that everybody has access to the recipe, how to make it. They take a recipe for a desktop environment and they modify it, add this, add that, take out this, and we have choices. And if you want, yeah, and if you wanted to, I can give you a desktop that looks like Windows 10 and one that looks like Windows 11 if you had to have it look like it. But we have choices.
Do you need to format your thumb drive before installing Etcher? And if so, what format do you use?
That was a blank one that was FAT32. That's what they usually come when you buy a brand new thumb drive. It's usually a FAT32, and then I just plugged it in and use it that way. But like I said, you know, for me to use this thumb drive as a Windows thumb drive, and I would have to completely go in, and there's two different procedures to go in and totally delete partitions and erase things, and because the fact that Linux doesn't natively read Linux that well.
We talked about that before.
And we'll talk again, I'm sure.
And we'll talk about it again. Can you erase the ISO and so you can use it again, the flash drive again?
When you flash it next time, it'll tell you that it erases everything that's on there and does it again. Yeah, this one I've used the Etcher when we were doing the install at our computer club, and I had my 5 different Linux, and I rewrote Etcher or Mint on all of those. Now I've got to go back and put my other distros back on, so I have my choices again.
And my last question is, will this process that you showed us work with the other versions of Ubuntu?
Of course.
Works with any Linux product.
Just about any, and the net booting one even has on their website has a list of, here are all the ones that it works with, and it's almost all of the major ones like Ubuntu and Mint and so on.
Thank you so much. I'm finished.
So am I for now.
Okay.
All right, so now that we have a thumb drive that is ready to be bootable so that you can take Linux for a test drive, now we need to know, well, how do you boot it? And then what are you going to see when you get there? So Cal's going to take over for the rest of the presentation and answer those questions. So Cal, it's over to you now.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
For me, your volume is a little bit low, but that could just be me.
Me too.
Let's see. Let me, it was just fine a second ago.
Of course.
Hey, Cal, I need that for a virtual background.
Okay, all right. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Thank
That's
you.
better.
All right. Okay, so my object here is booting from a live USB on a Windows 10 computer. And have a little background. Windows 10 is currently the most used Windows version. And if you look, basically what this little graph shows is that Windows 10 has 77%. There's still a few Windows 7 out there for some reason. And Windows 11 has 16%. And the reason that Windows 10 is so large is that it's been around a long time. It had 6 years as the head version before last year. And then it was the first Windows that allowed people to have a free upgrade from the previous versions of 7 and 8. So you can have a machine which was produced back as far as 2009 and still be running Windows 10. In Windows 11, when they released it, they put a couple caveats. They said it's still free, but you have to have a machine that's fairly recent. And you have to have a machine which has an active TPM module. So that put a little brake on some of them. Now, when people go to Windows 11, some people will buy a new machine. So you will have a Windows 10 extra machine. A lot of people with recent machines would just be able to upgrade. However, many of the Windows 10 will not be upgradable. And in a couple of years, January of 2025, they're not going to be supported and not usable. And I expect that there will be many extra machines floating around that you can get your hands on. And I would say maybe a third of the Windows 10 machines that we have now, I expect not to be able to upgrade to Windows 11. So what we can do is convert the physical machine to Linux and extend the service life, and also keep it out of the landfill and minimize e-waste. And what would you do with this? Well, you might use it as a file server. It's a great place to learn how to use Linux. You have an actual machine. Some people use it just like go to the bank for your banking. So it's very secure, and that's the only thing you do on it. So what I like to talk about today is what would you do if you could get your hands on an extra Windows machine? But first, we have to make a trial run. And I'm going to talk about my experiences. And there are many different situations when you get to hardware, and hopefully we have other people that can chime in at the end if they have have a situation that I haven't encountered. So what I want to do is focus on these extra PCs, or machine that may soon become an extra PC, if you want to see if it's possible. And I want to talk about x86 PCs, Intel type PCs, or AMD machines, running Windows 10. And I'm not going to be talking about if you have a Windows 11 machine, a Chromebook, an ARM machine, a Mac, or possibly if you have encrypted drives such as BitLocker. Now, there are lots of ways around this second category, but I'm just not going to consider them today. Another thing is, everything I'm going to do today is temporary. It's just to look and see. There will be no changes to your current machine that you're testing it on. And unfortunately, when you get finished and you turn it off, the Linux will go back to the way it was before, and nothing you have done will be saved. Why would we do this? Is for evaluations. First off, we want to verify that a specific Linux operating system would work on the specific PC that you have in mind. Secondly, it's a great way to become familiar with Linux. Putting something on bare metal, as they say, putting it on actual hardware, brings up a lot of issues that you may not have ever encountered in a virtual machine. It also, if you do it long enough, it will show you the advantages of Linux over some of the other operating systems. Couple comments. First, if you're ever going to do anything to a machine, back it up first. Strange things can happen. So you need a bootable Linux USB, and John just showed you how to get one. You need internet and Wi-Fi connectivity, because we're going to test that. That's one of the tests we want to see if it will operate. And I'm going to use Linux Mint 21, and I'll say a few things. A second option you may consider is Xubuntu. It uses the XFC desktop, as John mentioned, but also it requires a little less hardware. So I would say proceed with caution. If you go along with what I'm showing you, you run into a problem, stop and think. Check the internet. Strange things can happen. I'll try to do something which is as robust as I can possibly find it. Now, a PC, that a regular Windows type PC, has to go through a boot sequence. Booting means loading an operating system into the random access memory. So if you look at a computer, it has a CPU, and associated with is the RAM memory. And this is where all of your programs really operate. It also is connected to a permanent storage drive. And I'm sure here that we have Windows in this particular situation. When you turn your machine off, the memory and the CPU go to zero. So when you turn it back on, you need something to start it again, or like a battery starting a car. So to do that, we have a chip, a firmware chip. And there are two types, BIOS and UEFI. This is basic input-output system, and this is universal extensible firmware interface. Now, I'll call this one probably EFI, maybe UFI, and this one BIOS. So when we start the machine up, the BIOS or the EFI actually has a very small operating system. It goes into memory, checks out the system, and its purpose in life is to find a bootloader. A bootloader is software that will load a real operating system. It has normally been set up in a certain sequence to go look in certain places. So in your machine, it normally goes to your hard drive. It finds the bootloader, and bootloader puts the operating system into RAM. The firmware never asks you. It's kind of set up, it's in the background, you never see it happening. However, if you get a bootable USB, you want to interrupt this process and tell it, hey, by the way, go look at this USB. So we will interrupt the firmware and tell it to go look into the USB. The USB will then load an operating system into RAM. And what we will end up with is a computer that is running off of the USB. This does not have to be involved in any way. Sometimes it can, and I advise against it, but we're going to do the whole system is going to run completely off of the USB. So let's look at the BIOS. BIOS was the original chip that came out, and to boot, your hard drive had to be set up in what we call MS-DOS partitioning, and it boots to something called a master boot record, which is just a little section at the beginning of the device. And so I'll call this as an MBR drive. It knows where to go. It would find the bootloader would find the operating system, and the operating system would be put on the machine. In the EFI system, it had an EFI chip, and they came up with a new partitioning system using the GUID, or globally unique ID. And they put this in the GUID partitioning table. So this is a GPT partitioning. And then the bootloader would be on this one, and they would find the operating system and load the operating system. Now, after a while, somewhere in the early 2000s, manufacturers, they only put one chip. So they quit putting the BIOS chip, and they put the EFI chip. But people still had these disks. So they simply made a switch. They put the program that was in the old BIOS, and they kind of stuck it in the corner of this chip because it's a bigger chip. And they call this a legacy boot. So you have the option to boot the old way or boot the new way. Now later on, Windows came along, and some say they did this for nefarious reasons, but they came up with something called secure boot, and this requires GPT, and which basically says you have to have a signed copy of the system, an authorized copy, which has a cryptographic code. And eventually they passed the code to Linux people, so Linux can secure boot. Then later on, for Windows 11, they said, well, you need the TPM, the Trusted Platform Module. And again, that's interferes with Linux. Linux can have its own secure boot in TPM if you know what you're doing, but a lot of this interferes with you loading a system. So just to let you know, as I go through, I'm not going to cover anything with TPM, but I'll talk about secure boot system. To get to this interruption of the BIOS, there's a trick you need to know, is that you put the USB in, and immediately when you start, you press a special key, and that will interrupt the system and give you a menu that you can go and boot your USB. Different manufacturers use different keys, and so here are a few, either escape or F12 key on the top row of your keyboard. I'm going to use Dell, so we're going to use it F12. You can also go into the BIOS another way, but I'm going to skip that. So here is a computer that I used, a laptop. It's turned off, and I had the USB. Here's the ISO with the Min21 plugged into it. And I tried several Dells over 4th to 6th generation and manufactured between 2014 and 2017. And all of these, as most computers you find, have EFI chips. And a few different test kind of interactions. So the first thing is, here is the ISO that I've made. And what I'm going to do is, there's the power switch. And as soon as I see this screen flicker, I'm going to push the F12 key. Maybe once, twice, hold it. And if you're lucky, will interrupt. You will see a little message, and here it says that I'm preparing a boot menu, and it has a little progress bar here. If you're not lucky, then it would just go into your regular system, and you have to turn it off and try again. Now, it used to be easy when we had spinning disk. If you have a regular spinning disk, you have a lot of time. But if you have these SSDs, they're pretty quick. So you have to be quick with the finger. But let's say you're good, you figured it out, and you get this boot menu. Now, these boot menus look different depending on who made your computer, but essentially they have kind of the same parts. Any highlighted is your selection, and you move it up and down with keyboard. And here it's found my USB, and this is in the legacy boot section. I also have a UFI, or EFI section. And I have another in the options. I can go into the full BIOS if I need to set some other controls, and I'll show you a couple at the end. And you can change the mode. Do you want it to be legacy or UFI boot? And my advice is don't do this unless you're building a new system. There's a lot of interactions that go on. So we just know that this exists if when you go to install, if you want to change the way it's set up. So here's there's several situations I want to go over. So here's a situation where I have a legacy boot, and the drive that I have in my computer has an MBR partition system. You can see here it says the boot mode is a legacy, and secure boot is off because secure boot requires a GPT, so it can't be on. Then here is the legacy boot, and this is the boot order. So it goes to this one, and then this one, and then this one, and this one. And if I want to make it jump ahead, I'll click on this, and I'll force it to go to the USB boot, and then it will boot my USB. Another situation, suppose I have the EFI on, but another switch could have been turned on, and it will say, if I can't find an EFI disk, I will go back to the old legacy MBR, legacy backup. So I can use either type of disk, and the situation basically looks the same, and I could boot into either one of them. Here's the third situation where I have EFI turned on, and I have only a GPT disk, and I have no legacy backup and no secure boot. So here's the boot mode is EFI, and secure boot is off. And notice that the legacy section has now disappeared. So now I have another operating system on this drive, and I have my disk. So I would click on the disk, and then it would boot. The final situation is I have the EFI, and I've turned secure boot on. And of course, I have to have a GPT hard drive. And it looks the same as before, and it'll boot, because these Mint and Ubuntu will boot with secure boot on. Now, if you got Windows 11 and TPM and disk encryption, things get a little hairy. So I'm not going to cover that section. So if you're successful, you'll get the boot menu, the bootloader menu, the grand universal bootloader. And it will give you a choice. And it says start Linux Mint, or you can start in compatibility mode, which is basically if you have a problem with your video screen, the display. So I'm going to pick this, and I'll tell you that generally it takes a few minutes. Be patient, things will happen, things will flip by, and it looked like nothing, it looked like a blank screen, and then all of a sudden, you'll see Linux Mint. So here's a Linux Mint. Now this is a complete working system running independently from the stick. You'll see also it has a little icon that says install Linux Mint. Don't do this, because then it will wipe out your Windows machine and add Linux Mint to it. You don't want to do that. We're just testing right now. Now, there are another couple options you might consider before I show you kind of some things you should check. First off, if you have a machine which has a little problem, is not as modern, you can use XFCE as a lightweight desktop. And the best distribution is better to use Xubuntu rather than the XFCE Mint, because Mint needs a lot more disk for backup, the way it backs up. So if you have less than 4 gigs of RAM, and you have a smaller hard drive, or you have a CPU which is not so fast, this is a good option. If you go through all the steps I showed you, you'll get to the menu which says try or install Xubuntu, and then it has the Xubuntu safe graphics. Same situation as before. The thing you got to know is it will come up and have this screen, and it will have a try Ubuntu. That's the one you want to do. And it'll also have this one which says install, which is what you don't want to do, because again, that wipes out Windows and adds this permanently. So then you're on the XFCE desktop, and operations are going to be analogous to the ones I'm going to show you for Mint. If you go to the BIOS or the EFI full menu, you have a lot of choices, but there's only 2 I would even consider touching. One of these is boot sequence, and another one is secure boot. So if you go to the boot sequence choice, up here is the order in which you will look for boot. So you could put the USB, you just hit the little up and down arrows and you move them up and down. So you could make, let's say you wanted to constantly try this, without having to try to beat the timer on the boot key. You could put this and it would try a USB if present. If you're not doing this, the disadvantage of doing this is it takes a few extra seconds to boot. I recommend highly, do not touch any of this. Do not change legacy and EFI unless you're going to rebuild the system. Somewhere further down in this, you're going to find the secure boot. It will either say secure boot enable or disable, and up at the top, you'll be able to enable it or disable it. Some Linux systems may not have the secret code, and you can turn this off, and then you can boot it, and then you can turn it back on after you're finished. And you got to remember to turn it on, because then your original system may not boot, although you've done nothing to it wrong. You'll have to go back with the hotkey and turn it back on. So there's several things you should do when you get into Mint to make sure everything's working before you say, yeah, I'd like to put this on the machine as a permanent system. You can look at make sure that the menus work, the Windows controls work, your mouse works, the timeout for the power is set. Look and see that the system actually is what you think it is. You can change the desktop background. You can hook to your network, to the internet, and you can check your system, your battery, and what your disk is, and you can set the time. And I would launch, Firefox comes as a default browser. This is a good way to make sure you have the internet connection, download a video, make sure the sound and the picture works. You can open LibreOffice, which is like Microsoft Word, and make a little note and print it. Sometimes you have to add the printer, and you can go to the software manager, try to add something, and you might even try to add Chrome. If you're a Chrome user, to make sure, well, you're going to be happy that you're going to have the same browser. So here is what I've been talking to you on. I'm actually running a live USB. This is a live USB. This is what a live USB would look like. Here is the way you get the launcher. Right here is all the settings. So if you want to go and check your settings, one thing I do is, if I check my mouse, I like a left-handed mouse, to set it here. The display will come up. You can plug another display in and make sure that it has the resolution that the highest resolution that your device can handle.
Cal, could you hide the film strips on the side again? Because we got a big black bar across the side and across the top.
Can you hear me now?
Not as well.
Hold on. Every time
But it's yeah.
It jumped out. Okay.
Yeah, it's the Zoom windows that are blocking us.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Much better.
Yeah. It happens with us. Anyway, it has a problem with Zoom. Okay.
Yeah, if you can get rid of the film strips on the side. because that's taking up a lot of room that we might not be able to see.
Okay,
That's better.
all right.
Thanks.
So over here is where the volume is, and your internet. This is if you have, this will check that you can get on your Wi-Fi, and you can launch your browser. I will show the software manager. Oh. This is where we get our programs. And just to show you that if you want to get a particular program, such as, I get the shortest one I can see, fine. Here's a program. If I want to load software, I simply hit install and it installs it for me. And it will install it on the USB stick, but then when I get out of it, it will go away. All right, it's almost finished. And you can also, if you go up to the top, you can search for things. For instance, if you wanted to add Chrome, Google Chrome comes as a flat pack, which is packaged system, and you get the Chrome just like you have on Windows, which I'm not going to install because it takes a good while. So anyway, that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what I would do to check out the system before I would try to do a full install. And that would tell me that it was good to go.
Before we start questions, I want to kind of explain that these workshops that we're going to do for the next couple of months or so are all going to be linked together with required homework activities. And the activity is for non-Linux users that we want you to get an 8, 16, if you can, can't really find 8s as well, but a 16 gig thumb drive. And we want you to do what we did today. Get a Linux, put it on a thumb drive, boot it, like Cal said, to your computer. So you're running off of the thumb drive, and then check out and see how it works. And it works great, as he's showing you right now. He's running off the thumb drive. And then next month, we are going to go to the next step, and we will talk about installing Linux onto a computer hard drive permanently. And then Cal's going to be saying, okay, now that you've got it installed, here are some things that you need to do to get it all set up and whatever. So the homework is going to be, do the thumb drive, make it happen like we did today, and be able to boot up to a Linux so you can test drive it. Then we're going to be suggesting that you look for one of those older laptops, if you can, or computers that still can run but have questionable lifespan with Windows maybe, and then be able to install after next month, when we show you how to do all the install, do it yourself, and then come back in November and be able to share with us how that's going, because now you'll have an actual Linux machine that you can do, and you haven't touched your Windows machine at all. So homework for this week or this month is to do the thumb drive, boot it up, check out and become familiar with your Linux. And then we'll go to the next step next month and do the install. And I was bringing this up before the question so that in case Judy comes up with, some people have questions about installing Linux and whatever, we'll cover that next month. Today, it's been thumb drive creation, getting an ISO, booting up to the thumb drive, and then being able to look at a little test drive. So back to you, Judy.
I just have to say that you guys are both excellent teachers. It is crystal clear, and that is way cool. Just way cool. Got some questions here. What will happen if the thumb drive goes bad or gets corrupted? Then you can't use it. Can you make a copy of it from someplace so you have the same version on your thumb drive? Question mark.
Well, you just re-image it. You just take the linear etcher and re-image it. When you turn it off, nothing remains. If it's corrupted and it won't boot back up, then I've never had this happen, but you just re-image it.
Yeah, the ISO file is on your computer, and you can reuse it many times. Because yes, thumb drives do fail, and sometimes you can fix it by formatting and cleaning up that way and then reuse it. But there are always times when something goes extremely bad, and they're cheap enough that you toss it and get a new one.
I might also add, if you can possibly afford a 3.x, 3.1 or 3.0, it's a lot faster than the old 2.0s. Then it will actually be almost as fast as your regular hard drive. You won't notice any difference. But an older 2.0 thumb drive can have lag to it, a little lag, not too bad.
But the important thing is we want you to get the thumb drive so that you can test on the computer that you're going to install Linux if it matches up, the hardware and the internet and all, all of that. I had one computer that I was doing installing, and the port for Ethernet wouldn't work, but the Wi-Fi worked. So I didn't care, because where we're moving these computers or laptops, we will be using Wi-Fi not plugged in. So it didn't matter. So I know it works for Wi-Fi, and we're good to go with that one. Okay, Judy, back to you.
When running Linux on the flash drive, can you access the Windows hard drive? 2 thumbs up means yes, yes. Cal, would you please emphasize that each PC manufacturer can use one of their own chosen BIOS, UEFI systems, and screens? They're not necessarily all the same.
Absolutely. They're what I showed was Dell, and Dell has been consistent over the years. I've seen ones where they have all kind of pretty pictures and sliders, and the EFI system is quite large compared to the old BIOS system. So as always, some people like glitter and so you'll see some wild systems out there. But the terminology is always kind of the same, EFI boot, MBR boot, the terminology is what you're looking for.
Thank you. A few years ago, I was able to install Mint 18 with a root partition, home partition, and swap partition. I'm unable to do this with Mint 21. What happens in November?
We are talking about installing with multiple partitions. October, we're doing a simple install, and if we have time, we'll talk about that. But that's not the scope of today, because we're not talking about installing it. We're just talking about live running a Linux operating system.
Okay. So
Not
I would just
to put you off. So
just give me a yes or no answer. Can you do it with 21 like you did with 18?
absolutely, I've already done it.
Okay, there. Oh, you're smarty pants. Let's see. What's the lowest gigabyte USB you can use?
2 works.
2 gig? 2 gig?
2 gigs will work.
Oh, well, she was just worried about a 4 gig. So, hey.
Oh, no, 4 is fine.
She's those of us in computer clubs have stuff that we never got to be given away. So Dorothea says, I have a question from obviously a new attendee asking if he could save this presentation to his computer for future reference. John, you will be receiving follow-up material with a link to the YouTube video, as well as PDFs of both presentations. And let me see if I have any more questions in the chat box. Is running Linux in an emulator like Windows subsystem for Linux or VirtualBox on the agenda?
We've had it before and we'll have it again. Not that I don't plan to do anything about Windows subsystem. I'm a Linux person, so I will talk about virtual machines and that. Somebody else will be offering a workshop if they want to on the Windows sub. My feeling is personally, and that sounds bad, if I want to use Linux, I'm going to use Linux. I'm not going to use Linux inside of Windows.
Okay, very good. The chat box is closed because John Kennedy is going to do that right now for me, and we're going to go to live Q&A starting with Steve. You're on.
Not yet.
Well, not yet, Steve, but
I have to.
soon.
I can't do 2 things at once.
You've got 2 hands.
Yeah, but only 1 mouse.
Oh, darn.
All right, Steve, unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, very good. If you have an external SSD drive instead of a flash drive, thumb drive, would it be worth using the SSD instead? Would there be any noticeable difference?
Okay, it will reformat the entire SSD.
Yeah.
So you have to sacrifice the SSD.
Yeah, I know. I did the same thing with Windows 10. I took my whole system and put it onto an external SSD and booted off that. And there was absolutely no difference between going off the hard drive and going off the external one. It was amazing. I just wondered if there's any advantage to doing that same thing with Linux as well.
Well, if you want it on an external drive, which there's a couple things you got to set up to make sure it doesn't interfere with the Windows things, but you can install it on you can install it permanently on an external drive. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, on an SSD.
Yeah, you can do that.
I just wondered whether it's actually worth doing that or not, or whether it'll just run the same on a thumb drive as it would on an SSD.
If a 3.2 connecting will run pretty darn close, and I don't know if you you can have an extra drive inside. It's the same as having an extra drive inside. Do you want it? The advantage would be that you don't have any crosstalk or cross contamination. If you have like a Windows and a Linux. So the question kind of, I would answer the question is, I would rather do that than do a dual boot where I have two systems on the same drive.
Yeah. You know, I did the opposite of that because on my Linux machine, before I had this power gaming machine, that I couldn't really play the game that I wanted with my son on the Linux as well as Windows. So I created an external Windows drive. And so I would plug in and boot to that. And I could then play the game because I was running Windows actually off of the thumb drive. And it's because I didn't want to do a dual boot, as Cal said too. So if there's a reason that you don't want to install it on your device, the installing it to an SSD drive makes it as though that's just your regular drive. The problem is, well, you've got to have to plug it in, but it will be able to save and configure and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I would, you know, if you're just test driving, I wouldn't waste the storage space when Cal said you can do it on a 4 gig.
Jerry Crow, your turn.
Thank you. Regarding the question that was just asked, I interpreted a question from Steve to be, would it be faster if you had an external drive rather than a USB stick? In both cases, however, I believe that the speed limiting factor there would be the USB interface, not the device, but that's my opinion. And then I want to say real quick, because I've got to leave, but you answered a bunch of my questions, John. I run Linux, several versions, but I use the free VMware player and use the ISOs to build virtual machines. In my opinion, and this is just my personal preference, that's a far easier way, unless you want to go native Linux on your machine. That's a much easier way to do it and faster because you're running off of your hard drive in your machine. And let's see, there was one other thing which I can't remember now. So if you're going to talk about VMware and stuff in later editions here in a month or two, that's fine. But I would hope so.
we want to, because there's another one that GNOME now has, GNOME Box, that does it too. And I would agree. The only reason we're doing it this way is it's a lot easier to create that thumb drive like with Etcher than to create a virtual machine because you have to run in that program. But yes, being able to have options with a virtual machine, whether it's VBox or VMware or or Google or GNOME Box, or there's one other one out there. Yeah, we might have a whole workshop on virtual machines.
Yeah, that would be good. And lastly, I want to tell Cal that that's the best. I'm a very knowledgeable user, so you didn't say anything that I didn't already know, but I will tell you that is the best explanation of UEFI versus normal boot versus secure boot that you did, and how the machines boot up. I used to teach a course, tell people that when you turn off the power, all the memory goes zero, blank, and then to explain all the BIOS, because you have to be something there to boot the machine. Anyway, that was a very, very good explanation.
I'll second that. And I even sent a message to Judy shortly after he started, and I said, he's doing a great job, because I've known about that stuff, but boy, am I going to steal that from him.
Yeah, I hope we're going to get a copy of that. Judy's going to send out all the stuff. I actually sent you an email, Judy. I missed something last month or something, and I wanted the presentations, but I forgot to sign up. So anyway, but you should have gotten an email from me about that. But yeah, that was an excellent, just a superb explanation of how that all works. And it's interesting enough, you were using Dell, which is what I have. I have a Dell Latitude E7000 series. So all that stuff was exactly what I'm dealing with. Thank you.
Well, Cal has been doing this for 1,000 years, and he is the Linux guru for the Cajun Clickers, and he teaches classes in Linux. He's the leader of the SIG, the whole 9 yards. He lives and breathes Linux. So by golly, it's fantastic that his presentations are so clear, but it just oozes out of his fingertips. Donna, you're on.
And one last thing I wanted to mention real quick, and then I'm going to leave. Thanks. Thank you all. These are really good, these sessions. I've been using, I was a Linux system, a regular Unix system administrator in an earlier life. I will tell you that the early versions of Unix, you could get them on your PC, but it was a real task. And there was no desktop or anything. So like Mint is fabulous. I mean, it's really easy for a Windows user to migrate to that. And thank you all. Thank you, Judy.
Hi, Jerry. Donna.
Yes, okay. I appreciate the presentation from Windows point of view. Quick question, if you have Linux and you want to try another ISO, when you download the Ballinger and the ISO, you have to have the flash drive formatted so that it'll go to the flash drive? What's the
Well,
format for the flash drive?
I always do. I can't say that you absolutely have to, but in Linux Mint, there is a image maker, so that in some distributions, in Mint in particular, there is a program that will make the USB, so you don't have to use Berliner Etcher or whatever. It's already there, and there's also a USB formatter right there alongside it. So if you have Linux and you're formatting and writing another ISO, that's the way I always do it. I don't even know how to do it from a Windows machine. I've never done it. So so the answer is yes, you can.
So you would download the app image instead of the ISO?
No. You'd have to download the ISO. You can't use no distro comes in as an app image, only software. So if you're going to try another Linux distro, you have to have the ISO for it. And then you put that on a thumb drive to be able to boot to it to test it out.
Okay, thank you.
And I agree with Cal that even though some of these programs will warn you that they are going to wipe out whatever's on that thumb drive and put something new on, I have run into some problems and some others that reusing, like this thumb drive right now, you saw how Windows said that thumb drive can't be used. It's got to be formatted. Well, it's ready to be, booted up to Linux. So if I was going to be reusing this on a Windows machine, I probably would go through the process of totally wiping that thumb drive out, putting in a new partition table, putting it back to a FAT32 that Windows can, use real easy, and then do my next one. I wouldn't trust the program to do it,
John
I like
Kramer
it.
totally agrees with you.
Yep.
Okay.
And
Terry.
I was just saying, there are instructions on how to do it in Windows that you have to download a program and kind of do command line to get it to wipe out. But since I have a Linux machine will, redo that thumb drive real easy. But I had somebody I was working with that every time he made one, he said it didn't work because he tried to put it in as a Linux or Windows machine and it kept coming up as a bad thumb drive. And it, mine's doing that right now. It says, oh, you need to format this and wipe everything out.
An easy way to take care of it is just buy another inexpensive flash drive and have a whole bunch of them, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Exactly.
Terry, your turn.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say, what a great presentation. Second, do the settings on, when you make a change in the settings, when you pull your thumb drive, do all the settings changes disappear? And second, why are you only having a class once a month?
We
Okay.
have lives. We actually have 3 different Wednesday workshops every single month. We've been doing it since March of 2020. And they have their own clubs. They have other APCUG responsibilities. Like I said, Cal's heavily involved in the Cajun clickers. John is getting ready to shut down APCUG where they live and move it to a new location. And we're all volunteers. We get paid. And I personally put hours and hours into putting these together and the follow-up stuff and everything. So that's why.
Cal, go ahead and answer on the settings.
So in settings, which are we talking about, the EFI settings?
No, I think
No.
he's in
Go ahead.
regular settings. And then what happens when the thumb drive comes out?
Oh, all the settings go bye-bye.
Okay, so they all disappear.
They all disappear. So the purpose here, and this would be a case, you know, you can argue, I can argue about people who want to make virtual machines, but the purpose here is to make sure that the computer will work with Linux, okay, to make sure there's no gotchas, so that you can take this extra PC and turn it into a Linux machine. And the reason you would want a Linux machine over just a virtual machine is lots of privacy and security. Windows, Linux has a lot of advantages when it's native. It works the same with programs when it's virtual, but when it's on bare metal, you get other advantages and disadvantages. It's a lot of people want a Linux machine, and then they can run Windows virtually. And a lot of Windows people want a Windows machine and they run Linux virtually. But what do you need on your bare metal? And the case on here is, I'm trying to say, how would you check out if this PC is a candidate for a Linux machine that would do everything you need?
Yeah. And
I got that,
what-
but I was just hoping that possibly that you could download it to a thumb drive, whether it be larger than 16 or whatever, and just actually virtually have a second operating system to use.
You can.
Yep,
and
you
some-
can.
You can. Probably what you need to do, it depends which machine you do. You can install it onto the thumb drive, okay? Which we hadn't talked about. You can, generally I tell people, disconnect your hard drive so it won't mess it up. And then when you come back, generally that USB will be configured for that particular device. If you run it to another device, sometimes you have a problem. So you can have a machine, essentially, unplug it, it saves everything. You install it onto the USB, permanent install. And then let's say you want to do your banking, you plug it in, turn your machine on, it's completely isolated. So that's another way to isolate. For instance, I have Raspberry Pis. I have 4 or 5 machines, if you will, installed on the USBs. Depends what you need, what your purpose is.
The
So
part
that-
that we, okay, I'm sorry.
So, but that requires an install. And so what we want to do next is install it on a regular machine before we start talking about installing it on edge cases.
The part that we're missing is what we call persistence. And there are different distributions that can install their operating system on a thumb drive and add the persistence so that that has a partition that remembers everything. So it runs that way. That's, you know, a possible topic for another one. And Terry, I appreciate you wanting to have more of these, but Judy will be the first to point out, we have been nonstop except for 1 month of a vacation, for almost 2 years. And I would have to say, Windows doesn't do everything, a program every month, and Mac doesn't do it every month. We have lots of programs, but I've got a team who's willing to come back month after month to do this. And we'd like to do more, but we don't want to take over the Wednesday workshops and be just a Linux workshop. So Terry, we have all of our videos for the past couple of years on our YouTube. You can watch all of those and catch up, and we'll be back. Like I said, we've got October, November planned. December will be off because of the Christmas week, and we'll be back in January. We already know that. So we're here for a while.
Gee, I have you on the December calendar. I'll have to take you off.
Well, that's the Wednesday before Christmas.
Oh, then I don't have you on. And Terry, come to find out, I'm in SoCal. Oh my, 2 of his Linux team come from SoCal. And happened, and well, John knows Orv, but I asked him if he'd like to play, and my member Melton. And so, and we're always looking for people to join the team. We're always looking for people to give presentations. And I'm sure John wrote down that idea that he said that might be another presentation. Rod, and thank you for your help this morning. I appreciate it.
More than welcome. Let's say, for example, you've got your USB stick working and you've made bunches of changes on the Mint21 system, and you really like the way it is. Now, I noticed in the menu system there was a line there that said install on the computer. Now, if you installed on the computer at that time, did a permanent installation, would it install the original ISO, or would it install the system you have on the USB drive with all the changes you've experimented with?
Well, you got me there.
It will install the original ISO. It won't add the changes. You'll have to go in, because remember, it doesn't have permanent. So it'll be a clean install on your new device, and then you'll have to make the changes that you like, unless you know how to maybe find the some of the settings that might be there and copy and paste them over.
I think the only thing it remembers is the Wi-Fi password.
But again, the whole, sure, the whole idea is we want you to be able to try it without worrying about doing something to your Windows machine. And the idea also is on the homework for October to November of finding a machine to use, is that you could start with the Mint Cinnamon that Cal did today, try it on that box and find out, oh, it's not running very well. Then you could drop down and say, okay, let's burn the Mate version on here and see how it runs. Maybe that runs okay, or maybe it still doesn't. So you can test drive the XFC, like the Ubuntu one, and or the Linux Lite. And then when you find a version of Linux that works fine on that device, off you go.
Are there any more questions?
Kevin.
Thank you for letting me use my real hand to raise.
No, I know.
I saw it. I saw it.
And no, I was going to call on him because he did do it properly, but then he left.
Thank you. Yeah, yes. At what point in the series do you think we might address some of the previous gentleman's concerns? I had built a bootable Linux system quite a while ago, and I noticed that the one I had didn't have LibreOffice on it, and now I guess it's pretty much a given it is. But I don't want to go full hog and everything, but is there a reasonable way to pick and choose some of the software I want? Maybe I want to have Chrome in there initially. Maybe I want to have LibreOffice and maybe try another one, and have all of those go into my ISO, and so that when I build the ISO and then test it out or install it on some machine, that stuff is already there. And I'm not asking the question today per se. I'm just asking where along the lines will that be an appropriate question?
Yeah, it could be. I can just toss out that some distributions I have had and use MX. MX lets you customize the operating system and then lets it burn to a bootable thumb drive with all of that information. So I set up a laptop the way I liked it, made that thumb drive, took it over to my desktop, used it, and that desktop was a mirror image of my laptop. You're getting into where you're talking about compiling and creating an ISO, but what would do is that, you know, take a machine with the operating system you want, make it the way you want it, and then see if we can find a program that will, like the USB maker program, that will make it identical to what you've got and not just a standard ISO. I understand what you want, but that's creating your own distro, Kevin. You can do that.
No, see that I didn't want to have to. I don't think I want to go that far. It's like, I like Linux. I started when Linux wasn't Linux, it was Unix way back in the Bell Labs days. That was my first encounter with it way back when, where the guy takes a listing this thick, only half size green bar paper, slaps it on the desk and says, "That's Unix." And it was like, whoa. And it was amazing. Anyway.
Yeah, well, we have some versions of Linux that are so bare boned that when you install it, you have to say, I want this browser, I want this, because if you don't, it'll be an operating system that has like nothing on it. So there are a few that you can really customize so that you don't have things you don't want and do have things you do want.
The Judy Tallur way.
Yes, the Judy
what?
way. The Judy Tallur way.
All right. Okay, thank you. I think.
Yeah, well, that it's something, if we can find somebody who's an expert on that and they can share that, we can add that to our list of possible topics.
Tim, I was going to call on you and ask you to please state your chat box question for me and for John and Cal. So on to you with whatever else you are wanting to say.
Okay, I'll get to that part last that you're referring to. For Kevin, if you take an ISO and you have the right software to burn it to a flash drive that creates a persistent storage area, when you run the live distro, you can download updates to the ISO. Also, you can download programs and they will stay there as long as you don't overwrite the flash drive. So it is something that is doable, but sometimes finding the software to burn it with persistence can be a little bit difficult. Now, regarding what I put in the chat box, I want to mention, we've been talking here about the Linux Mint, which is the standard based upon Ubuntu. And they also now make, and have for several years, the LMDE version of Mint. That's the Linux Mint based on the Debian operating system. I use both. And they look absolutely identical. They have the same desktops, and you can play with both. But the LMDE has both an up-to-date 32-bit as well as a 64-bit. And if you're wanting to put the Linux on an old 32-bit CPU system, LMDE would give you that option to run Linux on a 32-bit, and it's all up to date.
That's good. I have dreams and hopes that Mint will switch to LMDE as their only one. They have that just because they got to have a backdoor in case something happens to Ubuntu. So Mint has gotten very smart and says, okay, we're going to have 2 versions. And that way, if Ubuntu explodes and goes away, we've got a version to continue. My only problem with LMDE is that they only had the Cinnamon desktop. And I like the Mate and XFCE. And
Incorrect.
did they switch that now?
They have the Cinnamon, Mate, and XFCE versions in 5.
Good. All
in
right.
version 5.
Okay,
They're
so
still-
that's, go ahead, Cal.
They're still based on the Debian builds, which are probably just slightly behind the Ubuntu builds. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, thanks, Tim, because I hadn't checked the new version to see, but before I've had LMDE, and when they switched to the Cinnamon, that wasn't my favorite, but that's just me. But now that I know, whoa, I'm good to go on that.
Oh, that's your major thing you learned today. Isn't that too cool?
Oh, no, I learned something from Cal,
I mean,
too.
but that was the woo one. Cal
Yep.
from Canada. Yeah, that be you. Do you have any software that could answer Kevin Beauregard's question about gathering all things together and being able to pick it up and move it someplace else? No, because I saw you nodding your head sometimes, and I know.
No, this is no.
Okay.
This is John mentioned this is
Oh no, that was Cal. I'm talking about Cal from Canada.
okay.
Cal from Canada spells his name with a K.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything in mind that gathers it all together. I use a persistence USB drive myself. I have a lot of USB drives, so I just keep them there.
Okay, thank you. Because I saw you going like this when he was talking. Remember, I can see everything.
Yeah, it would be nice to be able to have a software that would take a distro and modify it, the ISO itself, before you had to install it and then make all those changes. And I'm sure it can be done if you are a developer because with Linux, you can see the whole the whole line items of everything for that ISO, and you can go in and change it. You can, I'm not a programmer, but you can go in and add something and take something out. And that's what all these 150 creators of the different Linux has done. They've taken like Debian and they pulled it apart and made all the changes, and now they got this program. And Ubuntu did that. Mint went to Ubuntu and took it apart and built it. So if you're a developer, yeah, you could go in there, and maybe eventually there's a program that'll be designed to let you say, okay, what desktop do you want? What software do you want? And then here's your ISO.
And Tim is involved, or the leader of, the Linux SIG for the Chicago Computer Society. I'm sure, Terry, if you wanted to attend one of their SIGs, he would be happy to have you. John has one, but his is kind of in flux right now because they're moving. But again, anybody that has a Linux SIG invites people to come. The Brookdale group in New Jersey is a more advanced Linux SIG. So there's opportunities out there to get a Linux fix other than the third Wednesday of the month. Cal with a K, I'm sorry, from Canada.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify there. If I was doing that, if I was looking to gather together files and folders, I typically just move the entire root directory over. That makes it quite easy to do, or the contents thereof, and then I would just reflash the USB drive. That's the way I would manage that. I'm sure that somebody has developed a program or a utility to facilitate that, but I don't know of any.
Thank you.
I'm sure in the Arch family that they
Kevin
can do
says-
that.
Kevin says thank you too. Any other questions from anybody? Your mind is boggled with what you have learned. Remember, you'll get a PDF copy of both presentations and a link to the video. And I'm standing on my soapbox now. I'm 2 inches shorter than I used to be, so I'm back to being 5'6" right now. And I sent chats to the people who only have their first name and say it's problematical if you're going to get the follow-up material, because you aren't the only one with that name. I have 2 of a lot of those people, and I don't know which one was at the meeting. And I want to make sure that it goes to the person who is at the meeting. So the first thing I do is sort, and and if I can figure out who they are, that's fine. If not, they go up to the top of the list. And like John said at the beginning of the meeting, Judy lets me know she's very sad because X number of people aren't going to get the follow-up material. They're not going to get the link. They're not going to get the PDFs.
And I've said, I've turned on the chat for a few minutes so that if there is anybody that needs to send her the full name, you can do that through the chat now again.
Yeah. And it's super simple to rename yourself. You merely right click on your face and then you choose rename and you type in your real name, and it needs to be the one you're registered with. Thank you so much for listening. Off soapbox now and back to being short.
Good. I would like to really thank all of you who joined us today. When we put this together before, we weren't quite sure. I'm hoping that there were a lot of Windows people that are going to be wanting to give this a try. It's not going to hurt your Windows machine to do this. And you might find out that, you kind of like that. Remember that the homework assignment was to get yourself a thumb drive and download an ISO, use a program like Valina Etcher and make it a live one, and then use what Cal taught you today about booting up to a thumb drive and take a little look around. As I said, next month, we will take the next step and we will talk about simple installing it to a computer. And then Cal's going to be saying, okay, now we've got it up and running. Here's what you need to do. And off we go with setting it up, customizing it, whatever. And then November, we come back in to see how everybody's doing. And we have a couple of other things on our list that we might throw in, like Ben Toy or something else. So I want to thank Cal for being here today and presenting an excellent job. And I think he won't mind if you do what I'm going to do and steal that for your group and be able to explain BIOS for Windows and Linux. It's helpful. Thank Bill for being here to assist any problems. And of course, Judy for doing our questions and monitoring that. Next week, excellent program. You've already seen the paragraph about it. We have a number of people, right, Bill, that are going to be talking about home studio, creating a home studio in your house. So if you're not registered, get yourself registered, and we'll see you to round out September. Amazing. September is almost over.
And
Home theater,
October,
John.
yeah,
Home theater.
I
I'm
was going
sorry.
to slide that in, Bill.
Yeah.
And
It's like
October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So hopefully you have gotten in touch with me and scheduled Bob G to give a presentation to your group. He updates his security presentation every single year. And the members who have the opportunity to hear it, it's fun. It's not boring. You laugh. You don't cry, but you laugh. And I still have places on his spreadsheet that are open, and he's more than happy to give 2 or 3 a day if need be to get the security word out. And we will have a lot of security, oriented workshops on my time, the 2nd and the 4th Wednesdays of the month.
I just got to thinking, Judy, isn't it too bad that Bob has to keep redoing it every year because we have more security problems each
Yeah,
year?
and the changes, the focus changes every year. He starts working on it in December, and he also updates it during the year. It is not a static presentation. It's like when I give a presentation to a group, I update it. Even if I gave it last week, I check, and I just hit my laptop. I make sure that something hasn't happened in that week's time that makes some part of it obsolete, but he updates it all year long. So if you had, if you saw it in January, you might see a totally different presentation, having it for your group, in October. I'm J. Talor at apcug.org. Just shoot me an email. Let me know what date you would like. I'll check the spreadsheet. And if it's available, I will let you know one way or the other, send you the description, his bio, and his new for 22 headshot. And I'm surprised that everybody doesn't have at least 1 or 2 laptops hanging around that you just haven't taken to e-waste yet. I have a Dell and I have an HP. They're still usable, but they're not the latest and greatest.
Or check with your friends. They might have one.
Yeah.
Check with your computer club that refurbishes and recycles. Okay, thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next Wednesday. And I will see many of you next month on the 3rd Wednesday, and we'll do another Linux from the Windows point of view. Thanks so much. Save your chat. Aha.
I did twice, huh?
Goodbye, everybody. And goodbye, Judy and Bill and Cal. Chunk.